Welcome to Bias Breakdown. I'm your host, Kara Rucker. There's a divide between the political left and right over the Trump administration's use of the 1798 Alien Enemies Act to deport alleged Venezuelan gang members to an El Salvador prison. The ACLU sued on behalf of 5 of those detained, and a federal judge blocked the deportation flights. Media coverage of the story reflects the political divergences on the issue, with left and right-leaning news outlets framing the facts differently. That's the focus of today's Bias Breakdown.
Join Straight Arrow News. See the slant, avoid the bias. When others skew the facts, we give you the truth down the center. Welcome to Bias Breakdown.
The question at the heart of the lawsuit is whether the Trump administration can use the Alien Enemies Act to deport Venezuelans in the country illegally, alleged to be associated with the gang Tren de Aragua, to a Salvadoran high-security prison. This is still being decided in the courts. The other is whether the Trump administration violated a judge's order to stop migrant flights while the broader case plays out. As of this recording, the judge says he's looking into whether the administration violated the order, and the administration argues they didn't. But the media already came to their own conclusions that fit their political side. Here's a few examples from left-leaning news outlets suggesting the White House defied the judge and violated court order. From the New York Times, a judge ordered deportation planes to turn around. The White House didn't listen. The Washington Post, deportation flights landed after judge said plane should turn around. And The Guardian, U.S. deports 250 alleged gang members to El Salvador despite court ruling to halt flights. Several right-leaning outlets reported the deportation flights made it out of the U.S. in time before the judge's order went into effect. From the Washington Examiner, Trump administration rushed deportation flights out of U.S. before judge blocked them. The Washington Times headline read, "Murder suspect, sex offenders, gun wielders were on deportation flight, judge tried to stop." And Breitbart wrote Secretary of State Marco Rubio and El Salvador's President Nayib Bukele celebrate deportations after judge fails to help Tren de Aragua criminals. So why is there conflicting reporting over whether the deportation flights left before or after the judge's ruling? There are several factors, including whether planes over international waters were still subject to the judge's order to turn back, and whether the order went into effect when the judge gave his verbal or written order. We'll break down the timeline to give you the full picture since this is central to the argument. On Saturday, March 15th, Judge James Boasberg held a hearing at 5 p.m. At 5:26 p.m., the first deportation flight leaves Texas, according to available Flight Radar 24 data. At 5:45 p.m., about 15 minutes later, a second plane takes off. Between 6:45 and 6:48 p.m., the judge verbally ordered any planes carrying anyone being deported under the Alien Enemies Act needed to be returned to the U.S. By this time, the first plane was over Mexico and the second was over the Gulf. That's according to court filings you can find on our website. Let's keep tracking. At 7:26 p.m., the judge's written order is posted online. The written order did not include language about turning flights around. 10 minutes later, near simultaneously, the first flight of individuals being deported arrives in Honduras, and a third flight departs from Texas. The passengers on the third flight, Trump's DOJ says, were being deported on the basis of Title VIII removal proceedings, not solely on the Alien Enemies Act, which, if that is the case, the White House says this flight would not be subject to the judge's order. The second flight pit stops in Honduras shortly after the first, and by about 1 a.m. on Sunday, March 16th, all 3 flights landed in El Salvador. Early Sunday morning, El Salvador's President Bukele posted on X, "Oopsie, too late," in reference to the judge's orders. Bukele also uploaded this footage of the alleged criminals unloading off the planes and into the prison. In a notice to the court submitted by the DOJ, U.S. Attorney General Pam Bondi wrote, some gang members subject to removal under the proclamation had already been removed from the United States territory under the proclamation before the issuance of this court's second order, referring to the judge's order to halt all flights related to the Alien Enemies Act as the second order, with the judge's first order, the morning of March 15th, being not to deport the 5 individuals in the ACLU's lawsuit before expanding it that evening to all flights. In response to the notice, the ACLU argued the Trump administration blatantly violated the judge's order, writing, whether or not the planes had cleared U.S. territory, the U.S. retained custody at least until the planes landed and the individuals were turned over to foreign governments. Defendants could have turned the plane around without handing over individuals. Judge Boasberg demanded last week the Trump administration turn over information and answer questions about the timing of the flights, when the planes left U.S. airspace, and how many people were being deported solely on the basis of the Alien Enemies Act. The DOJ argues that information is sensitive and is now fighting the judge's order requesting the data. Here's Bondi on Fox News Sunday Morning Futures.
The Supreme Court will get involved. This is an out-of-control judge, a federal judge trying to control our entire foreign policy, and he cannot do it. He's trying to ask us about national security information, which he is absolutely not entitled to.
In a Friday hearing, after the DOJ declined to hand over flight information, Boasberg asked, why was this law essentially signed in the dark and these people essentially rushed onto planes? It seems to be that you only do that if you know it's a problem and you want to get them out of the country before lawsuits can be filed. Trump's border czar Tom Homan responded to the order in an interview.
You're going against the judges now. What's next?
Another flight every day. We're not stopping. I don't care what the judges think. I don't care what the left thinks. We're coming.
Holman later had to clarify on ABC News the administration is obeying the court's orders, not sending deportation flights out on the grounds of the Alien Enemies Act, but is still conducting regular deportation flights, including one to Venezuela that took place on Monday.
I understand this case is in litigation through the Alien Enemies Act, and we'll abide by the court order as litigated, but my quote was, despite what he thinks, we're going to keep targeting the worst of the worst, which we've been doing since day one, and deporting from the United States through the various laws on the books.
This back and forth court battle is still playing out, with the DOJ employing the State Secrets Act Monday night, which allows the executive branch to block the use of evidence when it feels revealing certain information in open court could harm national security. The DOJ on Monday also asked an appeals court to lift Judge Boasberg's order. It's unclear how or when the appeals court will rule, but one of the 3 judges had this to say.
There were plane loads of people. There were no procedures in place to notify people. Nazis got better treatment under the Alien Enemy Act than has happened here, where the proclamation required the promulgation of regulations, and they had hearing boards before people were removed.
This argument over the deportation flights to El Salvador consumed the news cycle. Networks with a left and right lean in their coverage are broadcasting different narratives. Between hosts, analysts, and guests on their shows, networks on the left are leaning into the accusation of the Trump administration overstepping its authority. And networks on the right are leaning into accusations judges are overstepping their authority. The Trump administration's argument shared by networks on the right.
Obama nominee Judge Patricia Millett made her own political speech with words chosen that would, of course, guarantee her national media coverage. Nazis, of course, they're back to Nazis.
A lot of these judges have, in my view, exceeded their authority, including the imposition of national injunctions. And on that, I think that the Trump administration has a winning case to make.
And the ACLU side of the case shared by left networks.
Veronica, how strong do you think the administration's case is here?
I think it's a very weak case. I think that this is, in the end, going to come down to checks and balances. Congress did not speak to this, and the president wants to take this unusual power for himself.
This is the overreach of big government.
Is that what we are as a country? Really? Is that what MAGA really wants? A president to have that kind of power? Because you know what? That power can be used against anybody. Well, that's what the courts are there to decide, whether a lawsuit is frivolous, not Donald Trump.
The media's coverage of the story has been conflicting, as you heard there, and at times contentious, as networks take the court battle to the TV screen. On CBS's Face the Nation Sunday, anchor Margaret Brennan pressed National Security Advisor Mike Waltz over the use of the Alien Enemies Act, which is supposed to be reserved for whenever there is a declared war between the U.S. and any foreign nation or government, or any invasion or predatory incursion. Then, subjects of the hostile nation or government within the United States and not naturalized can be apprehended and removed.
Just to clarify on that, this is supposed to apply if the U.S. is at war with a country. You are saying you have evidence that the government of Venezuela is directing these gangs?
We are saying that TDA is acting as a proxy of the Maduro regime. This is how the Alien and Sedition Act applies. And we cannot have district judges interfering with the commander-in-chief's actions to take care of, in the way he deems necessary, a terrorist organization.
So the U.S. is at war
and I
with
got to tell you,
Venezuela?
we're making a Washington, D.C. distinction when the American people are tired of being terrorized by these gangs.
No one is defending gangs, but
but it sounds like it. It certainly sounds like it.
A similar scenario played out on CNN, with anchor Casey Hunt pressing Deputy Chief of Staff Stephen Miller on the legality of the administration's use of the Alien Enemies Act to deport TDA gang members.
So do you then think we are actually at war with Venezuela, the nation state of Venezuela?
You're not hearing me and you're not understanding me.
It does say in the very beginning there has to be a declared war against a nation or a state. That's what it says.
No, wrong.
In summary, there's an ongoing court case over the legality of the Trump administration's use of the Alien Enemies Act to deport alleged Tren de Aragua gang members and a district judge's order to stop related deportation flights. It could make its way all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court and is currently sitting in an appeals court. The Trump administration had some deportation flights already airborne. The district judge is now investigating whether the flights violated his order or not. The media on the left and right are presenting arguments for the side that best fits their political narrative, rather than presenting you with the facts, statements from both sides of the courtroom, and then leaving it to you to form an opinion with the information and balanced arguments presented. It's likely you feel one side has a stronger case than the other because we all have opinions. My job is to present you with the news, not to persuade you. If you were to read or see this story only from a news outlet on the left or right, you may have been guided through their preferred political lens. But the verdict in this case is still out. And that's your bias breakdown. Thanks for watching this week's episode. If you missed an episode, you can always find the full podcast by searching Bias Breakdown on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Let me know your thoughts on this week's story in the comments. And if you enjoyed our Bias Breakdown, please give us a like or subscribe if you haven't done so already. I really appreciate your support on this podcast project of ours. Thanks to Ian Kennedy, our video editor, and Allie Caldwell on this week's graphics. I'm really grateful for the talented team behind me. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you here again next week.